Charles Wallace sighed sadly and tried to find the right words to ease the mental suffering of his granddaughter. Love is often unhappy, and he understood this like no one else. "Jody, don't be sad. You're hurt, I know, but life goes on," Charles Wallace said cautiously. The old man knew that Jody and Simon had been friends since early childhood. They went to school together and sat at the same desk. Jody studied well and helped Simon in math and physics, with which the guy always had problems. A strong friendship eventually developed into something more that made young hearts tremble with love and tenderness. Simon courted touchingly and beautifully. Every morning there were flowers at the doorstep of Jody's house, which the guy shamelessly took from the flower bed at the city hall. The girl was very pleased with Simon's attention, and deep down she dreamed that someday they would become a real couple. Unfortunately, children's dreams often break against the harsh barrier of reality. The fact was that Simon's father was offered a good job in New York, and after consulting with his wife, he decided to move. Of course, the teenager could not go against the will of his parents, and after saying goodbye to Jody, disappeared from her life for many years. Separation was incredibly traumatizing for the girl. Buried in her pillow, she cried all night long, thinking that Grandpa couldn't hear anything. The old man's heart squeezed with pity, but he understood that only time could help in such cases. Mr. Wallace was very fond of his granddaughter, whom he raised alone. The girl's mother died when she was 5 years old. She never knew her dad. Mom took this secret with her to the grave. Gradually, Jody was able to heal her emotional wounds and preserve only the best memories about Simon. 3 years flew by unnoticed. During this time, Jody has blossomed even more and turned into real beauty. The girl decided quickly what her future profession will be. Jody wanted to become a nurse, just like her mom. Often trying on her medical gown, she admired her reflection in the mirror. Since Jody grew up in a provincial Ohio town, she decided to try her luck in New York, which looked like a dream to her. Charles Wallace was extremely painfully worried about the departure of his granddaughter, but he did not resist her and did everything to make it possible. "Don't forget your old man, honey, and come visit," the elderly man said, wiping his tears. "What are you talking about, Grandpa? I'll visit you and call you on the weekends," Jody hastened to reassure the old man. At first, the big city stunned the provincial beauty. The grandeur of the skyscrapers and the neon signs of the advertising windows were confusing and made it difficult to concentrate. But over time, the girl got used to the frenzied rhythm of the metropolis and felt quite comfortable. Jody entered medical school the first time. The girl loved her job very much, and the teachers could not help but notice her outstanding abilities. Time flew by quickly, and when it was the turn of practice, Jody was sent to the surgery department of a private clinic. For the girl, it turned out to be a severe test, which she passed with honor. Subsequently, after receiving an offer from a head doctor, Jody happily stayed at this clinic. Girl liked her work. By helping people, she felt that she was making the world a better place, and realization of this added to her self-confidence. Once a guy was taken to the department with an attack of an acute appendicitis. The symptoms were alarming, so immediate surgical intervention was required. Although the operation was successful, the patient's recovery was extremely slow. Jody felt sorry for the handsome guy who was burning from the high temperature, tossing in delirium and moaning. From the patient's medical records, she learned that his name was Jason Parker. Unbeknownst to herself, Jody became very attached to this guy. The girl, trying to ease his suffering, did everything possible and impossible practically without leaving his bed. When Jason finally came to his senses, he immediately asked, "I'm probably already dead, right?" "No, you still have a life to live, young man. Your indicators are good, and you're on the mend," Jody replied, embarrassed. Jason liked the young nurse at first sight. She perfectly combined femininity and beauty, which attracted him like a magnet. During the night shifts, the young people talked about everything in the world, feeling a growing mutual sympathy. After being discharged from the hospital, Jason continued to communicate with Jody. The girl found out that Jason is a very wealthy man, and his father was a rich oil industrialist. It is worth saying that Jason was able to look after beautifully, like no one else. Enveloping the girl in luxury, he instantly made her swoon. Jody fell in love and was ready to follow the groom anywhere, even to the ends of the world. It's hard to say if Jason loved her, because he was never deprived of the attention of the female sex and considered himself the center of the universe. However, this did not prevent him from proposing to Jody. "I do, darling," the girl exclaimed joyfully. The wedding was played modestly, which surprised numerous acquaintances of Jason Parker. At first, family life was going very well. The newlyweds were happy with each other, and saw their future happy and calm. The couple lived in a country mansion, gifted by the groom's parents. But a year later, Jason began to behave very strangely. Apparently, he simply hid his inclination from Jody, in order to appear better in her eyes. The girl had noticed some oddities behind him before, but blamed everything on her successive suspicion. Meanwhile, Jason's personality has developed imperious traits. He became an arrogant tyrant, who on top of everything else, counted every cent Jody spent. "It seems to me that you spent too much. I won't give you any more money," Jason said in a tone that broke no objections. Tears welled up in Jody's eyes from resentment. This was not the gratitude she expected from her husband. A sad life has now come for Jody. The girl felt like a bird in a golden cage, which is kept at home for beauty. And recently, Jason invited her to the terrace to meet a new driver. "This is Simon. Now he will accompany during shopping trips." Jody timidly raised her eyes to get a better look at the driver, and froze in surprise. Simon, who was her first love, was looking at her. He has grown and even changed for the better, Jody suddenly thought. But Simon, with all his appearance, showed the boss that he was seeing his wife for the first time. For about a week, Jody and Simon diligently feigned indifference to each other. Meanwhile, Jason was still oppressing his wife, trying to make her a servant capable of fulfilling his every whim. Now Jody was crying more and more at night, cursing the day she was first met Jason. One day when Jason went on a long business trip, Jody and a driver went shopping in the city. Watching Simon confidently drive the car, the girl involuntarily admired his strong hands. "Believe me, I haven't forgotten anything." Simon broke the silence and looked significantly in her eyes. Suddenly, without meaning to, Jody covered her face with her hands and burst into loud tears. Memories and experiences of the last days came flooding back to her at once. Simon abruptly stopped the car at the curb and took Jody by the shoulders. "I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I should have made myself known earlier, but I didn't know how to do it," Simon whispered, hugging Jody to him. The guy's heart shrank from tenderness to Jody, who for so many years he saw only his dreams. The young people interrupted each other, began to share the news and all that they had experienced during the forced separation. As it turned out, Simon was not married. The former lovers were incredibly glad that they were together, here and now. They didn't go home that day. Instead, Simon turned off the highway onto a dirt road leading to the river. A trip to the city turned into a date for young people. They spent the night in each other's arms, admiring the moonlit river. Fortunately, Jason didn't find out anything about their secret relationship. Ever since then, Simon and Jody have been seeing each other regularly, increasingly going out to town. Of course, Jason wasn't happy with his wife's frequent absences, but he did not find anything illegal in her actions. And soon an event occurred that completely turned the lives of hapless lovers upside down. The result of their passionate dates was Jody's pregnancy. Upon learning about this, Simon was over the moon with happiness. "Let's tell your husband everything. He's the man. He should understand," the guy suggested. "No, I'm telling him everything myself. Dear, I can't find right words," Jody said sadly. On the same day, she told her husband about everything. He became indescribably furious and raised his hand to her for the first time. Then he called on a phone and gave his henchman some instructions. "I will not divorce you. You will live in my house as a servant," Jason said and left the room. The same evening, Simon was beaten in a doorway by unknown people. Although the guy was strong, but against the several people he had a hard time. Simon didn't know that Jody had already called her grandfather and decided to return to her hometown. The girl did not want to live with the tyrant husband, who humiliated her in every way and raised his hand. Jody called a taxi and, together with the beaten Simon, left New York. Young people took risks, but they had no other choice. Charles Wallace did not ask unnecessary questions and was happy to host the fugitives. Imperceptibly, a month flew by. Jody calmed down, and the troubles associated with her ex-husband disappeared like a haze in the sky. Jason repeatedly tried to find his wife, but after Mr. Wallace threatened the rich man with the police and publicity in the press, he left Jody and Simon alone. He sent the divorce papers by mail, thereby making it clear that he had no complaints. And a few months later, a boy was born to a couple in love. After conferring, Jody and Simon named the firstborn Charles in honor of his great-grandfather. Looking at the happy parents, Charles Wallace no longer doubted that from now on, only love and mutual understanding would reign in their family.